overwhelmed by this. Thank you very much. I am the least of the speakers here, and you're standing up and screaming. You have a treat coming at 9 o'clock. I think you know what the program says. Dr. Ron Paul, no introduction needed. I think I was on the bench about a week when I was assigned to try small claims cases. You walk out into a courtroom, there's about this many people in the courtroom, and they each want about 10 minutes of your time to resolve their cases. The typical case is ridiculous. It's like the dry cleaner ruined my dress, but he also tried to pick up my sister. So a guy comes up to me and says, Your Honor, I need a translator for this case. I said, what's the language? He said, Italian. So I called the courthouse administrator and learned that the Italian translator was in another courtroom. So I said to the throngs in the courtroom, is there anybody here that speaks Italian? Little guy in the back raises his hand, he comes up. We swear in this guy to translate truthfully, and here's exactly what happens. Lawyer to translator, tell the court your name. Translator to witness, what is your name? Alright, let me see where this is going. Lawyer to translator, give the court your address. Translator to witness, where is your house? I looked at this little guy, I said, I thought you told me that you could speak Italian. He said, I can, Your Honor, but my English, she's not so good. In New Jersey, as in most states, when you're trying a jury case, the judge actually picks the jury. And again, you have this many people in the room, you have to extract 12 people who have no bias, no prejudice, no interest in the outcome. This was a drug distribution case. And I said to the crowd, is there anybody here that can't be on this jury? Lady in the back raised her hand. She says, I can't. I said, why not, madam? She said, because of my occupation. I said, well, what do you do? She said, I'm a soothsayer. Oh, come on. This is 1992. Who calls themselves a soothsayer? So I fall for this. I said, all right, madam, how does this keep you from being on the jury? She said, Judge, I already know how the case ends up. I should have said, tell us and save us all this time in the courtroom. I have not hesitated in my wonderful job at Fox, where I've been for 11 years, to be critical of the Bush administration and its assaults on civil liberties. But I bear a small portion of responsibility for this administration coming into existence. If you remember the recount days in November and December of 2000, as Fox's senior on-air legal person, I had to become an expert in Florida election law. And one night I was on the air with my colleague Britt Hume, and Fox did one of those whoosh alert things that we do about 4,000 times every hour. We have an alert. The Florida Supreme Court has just ordered that the recount resume not only in the 4 counties that Governor Bush has challenged, but in all 70 counties of Florida. And Governor Bush's lawyers are going to appeal that decision to the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit in Atlanta. And Britt Hume says to me, what do you think about that, Judge? And I said, well, it's pretty fundamental. You cannot appeal the decision of a state Supreme Court to a federal intermediate appellate court. He said, what should they do? I said, they should get in their cars and go to Georgetown and find the townhouse of Justice Anthony Kennedy and knock on the door and present an emergency petition to him, and if he stops the decision of the Florida Supreme Court, he'll get a vote of the other 8 justices the next day. That's the only avenue of appeal available to them. At this point, I went upstairs to take a nap for 2 hours because we were going 24/7, and I had to be on the air at 10 o'clock with O'Reilly, and of course you need all the energy you can get for that experience. At 7 o'clock, my ever garrulous, ever charming, ever on top of everything colleague Shepard Smith comes on, and he's reading the news when another swoosh Fox Alert comes in. Governor Bush's lawyers have just been cited in their cars in Georgetown. And they're looking for the House of Justice Anthony Kennedy to file an emergency appeal. At which point Shepard Smith looks in the camera and says, "Do you know what that means? That means that George Bush is watching Fox. And he's getting his advice from Judge Napolitano." And the rest is history. A little bit of history, if I could. When we were colonists and struggling for our freedom, and Thomas Jefferson was still a student of William and Mary, studying political philosophy, the king and the parliament decided, what else? They need a little bit more money, just like the government today. So they came up with this ingenious thing called the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act required that you go to a British government office and buy a stamp with the king's image on it. And that stamp had to be on every piece of paper in your possession. Every banknote, every letter that you wanted to put in the mail, every mortgage, every deed, every poster you wanted to nail to a tree, even the books in your library had to bear the king's stamp. Question: how did the king and the parliament know if you had the king's stamp on every piece of paper in your possession? Answer: the parliament enacted the Writs of Assistance Act, an utterly abominable piece of legislation which authorized British soldiers to write their own search warrants for themselves, authorizing themselves to knock on your door and ask to see your papers and look for the stamps. Of course, they somehow looked for other things while they were there as well. Is there alcohol imported from the islands on which there is no proof of tax having been paid? Is there furniture imported from England which you cannot prove how it got here and who you paid to get it here? It was truly one of the last straws. It was so abominable, so oppressive to the colonists that the Parliament would actually, in an effort to keep us from revolting, rescind the Stamp Act, but it was, of course, the last straw. When Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, he wedded the new American soul to the idea, to the concept of natural rights, that our freedoms come from our humanity, which comes from God. Our freedoms don't come from any government. You would think that that idea would have been as popular then as it is in this room, but in 1787, when Jefferson was in Paris and James Madison was carrying the argument in Philadelphia in the hot summer of 1787, Hamilton and Adams and the big government boys actually argued with this principle. And they advanced an idea which lawyers and legal scholars today call positivism. And positivism accepts the ugly notion that the law is whatever the government says it is. And that without the government there can be no freedom, and therefore freedom must come from the government. And they tugged and pulled between Jefferson and Madison's natural law arguments and the ugly notion of positivism. Of course, the Constitution would never have come into existence without the Bill of Rights, upon which Jefferson and Madison insisted as a condition for the ratification of the Constitution. And thus there came into existence the greatest governmental force for good in the history of the world, which was the creation of the American Republic. And when you think about how it came into existence, it's the opposite of what happened in Europe. In Europe, kings and potentates gave in to the demands for liberty from their subjects. That was power granting liberty.